Lieutenant Commander Xyra's four eyes widened in horror as she watched the human spacewalkers through her quadruple-filtered view screen. Her exoskeleton trembled slightly, causing her protective suit to adjust its internal pressure. "They're wearing only a single layer of protection," she whispered to the Concordat delegation. "How are they not dead?" Admiral Telix, the delegation leader, chittered nervously. "Our intelligence must be flawed. No sentient species would willingly expose themselves to raw vacuum with such minimal barriers." Yet the evidence floated before them. Human astronauts completed repairs on their primitive space station, protected by suits that, by Concordat standards, might as well have been tissue paper. The Concordat had encountered 67 sentient species across the galaxy. All followed the same evolutionary pattern: develop intelligence in safe, controlled environments, then create increasingly sophisticated protection to venture beyond those environments. It was the natural order. Humans had somehow evolved backward. Dr. Elena Reyes waited in the airlock as the alien delegation prepared to board the International Space Station. As Earth's chief xenobiologist, she'd spent months studying the Concordat's biology. Nothing had prepared her for their reaction to humans. "They're requesting emergency sterilization of the meeting room," Commander Chen said, checking the translation. "And they want all humans present to wear full isolation gear." Reyes sighed. "Tell them we've complied with their atmospheric requirements, but we cannot wear isolation suits. It would be diplomatically inappropriate to hide our appearance at first contact." The aliens nearly retreated to their ship upon seeing bare human faces. Only the Admiral's authority kept them moving forward. The disaster occurred 17 minutes into the meeting. A maintenance technician's 6-year-old daughter, brought aboard for the historic occasion, sneezed. Admiral Telix collapsed in respiratory distress. 2 aides vomited inside their helmets. Security officers deployed emergency containment fields, screaming about biological attacks. Footage of Concordat officials fleeing from what humans considered a minor bodily function went viral across both Earth and alien networks within hours. Later, safely reboarded on their vessel, the Concordat delegation reviewed their findings with mounting horror. They intentionally damaged their muscle tissues to strengthen them, the medical officer reported, still shaken. "They call it exercise. Their young are permitted to contact soil organisms for immune development," added the xenoanthropologist. "They consume fermented substances for pleasure that would be classified as neurotoxins on any civilized world," the cultural liaison whispered. Admiral Telix, recovered but shaken, studied the reports. "These humans are either the most resilient species we've encountered or the most suicidal, perhaps both." Back on Earth, the UN Security Council reviewed the Concordat's official communiqué. "They're offering us protection technology," the Secretary General explained. "Environmental suits, atmospheric scrubbers, biochemical regulators, standard for Concordat citizens." Dr. Reyes stood. "With respect, Madam Secretary, I recommend extreme caution. What they call protection appears physiologically unnecessary for our species. In fact, it could potentially atrophy the very adaptations that make humans successful." "They've classified Earth as a death world, Doctor," responded the Chinese delegate. "They believe we require immediate intervention. Or they fear what we represent," Reyes countered. On the Concordat vessel, Syra reviewed her personal observations. Unlike her colleagues, her horror had gradually transformed to fascination. These humans navigated radiation, temperature extremes, microbial exposure, and atmospheric variations with minimal technological assistance. What if such resilience could be studied, applied? As the Concordat Security Council voted to implement emergency protection protocols for humanity for their own safety, Thyra filed her official request for extended Earth assignment. She needed to understand how these naked apes had accomplished what no other species had, evolving to face the universe unprotected, and thriving because of it. 6 months after first contact, the Concordat Protection Initiative had transformed human society. Sleek environmental suits and personal atmosphere bubbles became the ultimate status symbols among the wealthy and powerful. Celebrities showcased their custom-designed protection systems on social media. Medical companies reported record profits distributing Concordat biochemical regulators that promised to extend human lifespans to 3 centuries. Dr. Elena Reyes stood before the United Nations Scientific Advisory Board, her unprotected appearance now a political statement. "The data is unambiguous," she said, gesturing to the holographic displays. Protected humans show a 32% reduction in bone density after just 6 months. Immune response is down 47%. Muscle atrophy progresses at an alarming rate, despite Concordat assurances their technology compensates for reduced physical activity. "These are expected adjustment periods," countered Dr. Sanjay Patil, recently appointed head of Human Concordat Medical Integration. His protection suit hummed softly as he spoke. "The Concordat has centuries of experience transitioning species to modern protection standards." "We're not like other species," Reyes insisted. "Our evolutionary advantage is adaptability through environmental exposure. We don't just survive stress. We're strengthened by it." The committee chairman sighed. "Dr. Reyes, your concerns sound increasingly like Luddite paranoia. Protection technology has virtually eliminated disease among early adopters. Because their protection systems haven't failed yet," Reyes muttered as the committee voted to expand the Concordat program. Outside the UN building, protesters from the growing natural human movement clashed with police. Their signs read, "EVOLV don't DESOLV," and "BORN free, stay free." That evening, Reyes received an encrypted message from an anonymous Concordat source. The files showed parallel protection programs on 7 other worlds, and their devastating long-term consequences. Meanwhile, in northern Canada, former Special Forces operator Jack Harper led a wilderness survival course. A dozen participants shed their protection gear, feeling real snow on their skin for the first time in months. "Your bodies remember this," Harper told them as they shivered. "Humans thrived in these conditions for thousands of generations. Your protection suits are lying to your biology, telling it you don't need to be strong anymore." A group of protected tourists observed from their climate-controlled viewing platform. One filmed Harper demonstrating ice swimming techniques wearing nothing but shorts. The video reached 1 billion views within days, including on Concordat networks, where it sparked outrage and fascination. In her private quarters at the Concordat embassy, Lieutenant Commander Xira removed her protection glove. The air burned against her exposed skin, but less painfully than last week. Her monitoring equipment showed concerning data. Her immune system activity had increased 22% since beginning these secret experiments. Her cellular regeneration accelerated beyond normal Vexillian parameters. Was she damaging herself irreparably, or discovering something her species had forgotten? Her communication panel chimed. Admiral Telix appeared, his protection suit now featuring additional filtration layers. "The Human Compliance Directive has been approved," he announced. "Protection will become mandatory in all major urban centers within 30 days. There will be resistance," Tyra cautioned. "Expected and manageable. We've incorporated subtle neurological modifiers into the protection systems. Nothing dangerous, just mild dampening of impulse behaviors, aggression, and creative thinking patterns that might lead to rejection of protection." Xira's exposed hand curled into a fist. That wasn't in the original protection protocols. A necessary adaptation for humans specifically. Their tendency toward resistance exceeds any species we've encountered. This is for their benefit. After the transmission ended, Xira stared at her bare hand. The pain had subsided sooner today. Adaptation was occurring. She accessed the classified neural modifier specifications and compared them with brain scans of protected humans. The evidence was clear. The Concordat wasn't just protecting humans from their environment. They were protecting themselves from human potential. Her decision crystallized. Tomorrow she would find Dr. Elena Reyes and share what she discovered. The protection initiative wasn't salvation for humanity. It was extinction by comfort. The Anderson family moved through New York's protection checkpoint, their new Concordat suits gleaming. Sarah Anderson had insisted they comply with the mandatory protection order. Her daughter Emma's chronic respiratory condition left them little choice. The protection suits had initially helped Emma breathe easier, yet 3 months in, the 8-year-old's condition was mysteriously deteriorating. "Final boarding for Montana Protection Zone," announced the transport system. Sarah clutched the counterfeit transit passes Jack Harper's underground network had provided. Their actual destination, an unregistered Eden enclave in Appalachia, where natural humans live beyond Concordat oversight. "Protection scan anomaly detected," chimed the automated system as Emma walked through. Sarah's heart pounded. The child's failing protection suit was flagging in the system. "Proceed to secondary screening," the robotic voice instructed. A shadow fell across the scanner. Lieutenant Commander Xira stepped forward, her Concordat insignia causing the protection officers to straighten. "Override authorization Theta 9, she said, pressing her authorization chip against the scanner. "Medical transport under my supervision." 20 minutes later, the Andersons' transport departed with Xira aboard. Only when they were airborne did she speak. "Dr. Rice is expecting you," she said quietly. "Your daughter's condition is common among protected children. The suits prevent normal immunological development. You're helping us escape," Sarah whispered incredulously. "Why?" Xira removed her glove, showing skin that appeared toughened, almost human-like. "Because I've seen both sides now." In the Appalachian Mountains, Eden Enclave No. 7 operated from a network of caves and sustainable structures. Dr. Elena Reyes had established 12 such communities worldwide, each specializing in different aspects of natural human resilience. When Harper brought the Andersons and Xira through the hidden entrance, Reyes was supervising a group of previously protected humans practicing barefoot hiking over rough terrain. "Welcome to Eden," she told the Andersons. "Emma's treatment begins immediately. First step, removing that protection suit." Sarah protested. "Her lungs can't handle unfiltered air." "They can't develop without it either," Reyes explained. "Our approach is graduated exposure therapy. We'll start with 5 minutes in our transition chamber, then slowly increase duration and environmental complexity." Harper crossed his arms, watching Xira. "Having a Concordat officer here endangers everyone." "She's been feeding me protection protocol weaknesses for weeks," Reyes countered. "Without her, we wouldn't have successfully extracted 300 protected children suffering system-induced autoimmune disorders. I remain technically loyal to my people," Xira said, "but not to protection ideology. The evidence of its harm is undeniable." In Washington, D.C., Admiral Telix reviewed the latest compliance statistics. 87% protection coverage in urban zones. Not sufficient. Rural areas resist implementation, his aide reported. And these Eden enclaves continue operating despite our best detection efforts. The protection initiative cannot succeed with contaminating influences present, Telix decided. Deploy the sterilization corps to the largest identified enclave. Show humanity the consequences of resistance. 3 days later, Emma Anderson stood in a mountain meadow, breathing unfiltered air for the first time in months. Her protection suit lay discarded nearby. The graduated exposure therapy had produced remarkable improvements. Her lungs, recolonized with beneficial microbiota, functioned better than they had in years. The attack came at dawn. Concordat enforcement units descended in sterilization vehicles, deploying atmosphere scrubbers and compliance agents. What they hadn't expected was preparedness. Harper's security systems had detected their approach hours earlier. When enforcement officers breached the perimeter, they encountered not frightened civilians but organized resistance from former military personnel and adaptability-trained enclave residents. The defenders' advantage: they could operate without protection in the forest environment. The Concordat forces, dependent on their suits, found their movements restricted, their sensors confused by simple countermeasures like smoke and mud. By midday, the Concordat forces retreated, having suffered their first military defeat against a technologically inferior opponent. Harper watched them go, knowing the retaliation would be worse. "We've proven they're vulnerable," Rice said, joining him at the observation point. "And made ourselves a priority target," he answered. Zara approached, her communication device chiming with encrypted orders. "They're deploying the sterilization cord. Full environmental warfare. They'll make this valley uninhabitable." "Can you stop it?" Rice asked. "No," Tyra replied, her transformed features hardening with resolve. "But I can make sure we're not here when they arrive." As evacuation began, Emma Anderson looked back at the Eden that had healed her. "We're leaving already." "We're not leaving, sweetheart," her mother said. "Eden isn't a place. It's how we live, and we're taking it with us." The Concordat flagship, unwavering certainty, shuddered as the wormhole collapsed behind it, stranding the vessel in unknown space. On the bridge, alarms screamed as emergency systems struggled to compensate. "Stabilize protection fields," Admiral Telix commanded, his exoskeleton clicking nervously inside his suit. "Status report. Catastrophic wormhole collapse. Cause unknown." The navigator responded. "Position. Uncharted. Nearest Concordat outpost. Unreachable." In the brig, Jack Harper felt the ship lurch. His cell's force field flickered, then failed completely. After his capture during the Eden Enclave raid, he'd expected execution, not this unexpected opportunity. 2 decks below, Lieutenant Commander Xera regained consciousness pinned beneath a fallen bulkhead. Pain lanced through her body. Her protection suit was breached, environmental toxins flooding her system. Without her secret adaptation experiments of recent months, such exposure would have already killed her. The ship's emergency broadcast echoed. Atmospheric containment failing. Protection systems compromised. Planetary landing imminent. Brace for impact. The massive ship skipped across the upper atmosphere of an uncharted world before crashing into a mountain range. The impact shattered the vessel into 3 sections, scattering survivors across kilometers of hostile terrain. Harper freed himself from the damaged brig and immediately began organizing survivors, even as protection-dependent humans and aliens collapsed around him. The ship's environment matched nothing in Concordat records. High oxygen content, unknown bacterial strains, and radiation levels that penetrated even the most advanced protection systems. 32 hours after impact, Harper led a scouting party from the largest wreckage section. They found the bridge module 2 kilometers away. Inside, Admiral Telix lay dying, his protection systems overwhelmed by the planet's environment. "Don't touch me, savage," the Admiral wheezed when Harper approached. "Your protection systems are killing you faster than this planet," Harper explained, removing the Admiral's damaged helmet despite his protests. "You need to adapt, not hide." In the 3rd wreckage section, Thyra organized the few functioning communication systems. Her partially adapted physiology had saved her life, but she remained seriously injured. Without proper medical assistance, she calculated a 9% survival probability. By the 3rd day, protection systems had universally failed. Protected humans and aliens suffered most severely, their coddled physiologies unable to process even minimal environmental stress. The unprotected humans from various Eden enclaves, initially a small minority among survivors, became essential to everyone's survival. Harper established 3 priorities: shelter, water purification, and medical treatment. He assigned tasks based on adaptability rather than Concordat rank, ignoring the protests of surviving officials. On the 4th day, Cyrus' condition deteriorated critically. Her hybrid adaptations had reached their limit. "I need to speak with Dr. Reyes," Harper told the communications officer, a protected human struggling with rashes where her suit had failed. "Quantum entanglement is damaged but partially functional," the woman replied. "We can transmit short bursts." Through broken, static-filled communications, Dr. Rice guided Harper through an unprecedented procedure, introducing controlled environmental exposure to Xira's system while supporting her body's adaptation responses. The procedure combined human wilderness medicine with Raya's xenobiological expertise. Her system will either adapt or shut down, Raya warned. There's no middle ground. For 18 hours, Harper monitored Xira's vital signs as her body fought against evolutionary programming that demanded protection. When her fever finally broke, her physiology had transformed. Neither fully Vexillian nor human, but something uniquely adapted to survive without protection. "You should have let me die properly," she whispered when consciousness returned. "There's nothing proper about dying when you could live," Harper replied. A week after the crash, Admiral Telix called a meeting of surviving senior personnel. His once immaculate appearance had deteriorated, but unlike most protected survivors, he was recovering rather than declining. "Rescue remains approximately 6 standard months away," he announced. "Our situation is unprecedented." "With respect, Admiral," Harper intervened, "we need to establish permanent settlement preparations. The protected individuals need systematic exposure therapy if they're to survive long-term." "You propose deliberately exposing personnel to environmental toxins," a Concordat medical officer objected. "I propose keeping them alive," Harper countered. "Look around. Who's thriving? Not those who remained in failed protection systems." A scout interrupted the debate, rushing into the makeshift meeting hall. "Sir, we found structures beyond the Western Ridge. Artificial structures." The subsequent expedition discovered the ruins of a vast civilization, cities that once housed millions, now reclaimed by the planet's aggressive vegetation. Inside a partially intact structure resembling a research facility, they found the answers. The planet's previous inhabitants hadn't been destroyed by its harsh conditions. Their advanced protection technology had created the perfect evolutionary trap. Absolute safety followed by absolute vulnerability when a common microorganism mutated beyond their protection system's parameters. In their drive to eliminate all discomfort, they had engineered their own extinction. Dawn broke over the crash survivors' main encampment, now a functional settlement 1 month after impact. Near the communal cooking area, Emma Anderson helped distribute morning rations, her once protected body now tanned and strengthened by daily exposure to the planet's conditions. "Commander Xira needs these medicinal plants for the transitioning patients," she told her mother, hefting a basket of purple-veined leaves. The hospital zone housed 37 survivors, still struggling with the transition from protection dependency. Some would not survive, their bodies too atrophied by lifelong protection to adapt quickly enough. Others showed remarkable recovery, especially children and younger adults. Inside the converted cargo bay that served as research headquarters, Xira meticulously documented physiological changes in both protected and unprotected survivors. Her own body had become a scientific curiosity, a hybrid adapting traits from both Vexillian and human biology. Protection withdrawal symptoms appear consistent across species, she dictated to her recorder. Initial immune overreaction, followed by rapid adaptation if properly supported through transition. Jack Harper entered, his expedition team assembling behind him. Ready for another push into the ruins. Xira nodded, securing her data tablets. The exploration of the ancient city had become their most valuable source of information, and most troubling. "Admiral Telix has assigned Commissioner Neville to accompany us," Harper said quietly. "He's concerned about the ideological implications of our findings." Xira's expression darkened. Commissioner Neville represented the Concordat Protection Directorate, the ideological enforcers of protection dependency across the galaxy. The expedition moved through the jungle that had reclaimed the alien city. Unlike Earth jungles, this one featured carnivorous flora that responded to carbon dioxide emissions, another challenge the unprotected humans had adapted to manage by controlling their breathing patterns. "Remarkable," Neville commented, watching Harper navigate past a cluster of predatory plants. "Though I maintain these adaptations are merely survival necessities until rescue arrives." Inside the vast information repository, a structure resembling a library crossed with a data center. Harper's team had discovered functional technology, ancient data storage systems activated by movement, projecting three-dimensional records of the planet's previous civilization. "We've partially translated their language," explained Dr. Keller, the expedition's linguist. "They called themselves the predecessors. Their civilization spanned this entire star system." "What destroyed them?" Neville asked. Keller activated a sequential display. Ghostly images showed a civilization progressively encasing itself in protection technology, moving from environmental suits to fully enclosed habitation systems. "They achieved perfect protection," Keller explained. "Zero exposure to environmental stressors for over 12 generations. Then a common soil bacterium mutated, bypassing their filtration systems. With no adaptive immunity, their entire population died within one stellar cycle." Commissioner Neville's expression remained impassive behind his breathing mask, one of the few protection components still used by most survivors. "A regrettable engineering failure. Our systems are superior." "It wasn't engineering failure," Harper countered. "It was biological inevitability. They protected themselves into extinction by eliminating the very stressors that would have kept them adaptable." Back at the settlement, Dr. Raya's image flickered on the quantum communicator during the brief daily transmission window. "Your physiological data confirms our findings on Earth," she told Syra. "The Eden enclaves have documented similar adaptation patterns in protection transitioning humans. We've developed a systematic approach. We're calling it the Resilience Protocol." The protocol combined controlled environmental exposure with supporting therapies to safely transition protection-dependent individuals back to natural resilience. The crash survivors became its first large-scale test subjects. Admiral Telix, his own health improving under the protocol despite his advanced age, called a council meeting to review the findings. "The data is compelling," he admitted reluctantly. "But the philosophical implications contradict 10,000 years of Concordat civilization. Protection is our foundational principle. Principles should serve life, not endanger it," Harper argued. That evening, Commissioner Neville secretly transmitted a heavily edited version of the findings to the Concordat Security Council, omitting key data showing the benefits of the Resilience Protocol. His transmission included a recommendation. Upon rescue, all survivors should be placed in isolation, their contaminated perspectives contained before they could spread. Under starlight, Harper found Syra at the settlement perimeter, her modified physiology requiring less rest than either parent species. "The Concordat won't accept these findings easily," she said, watching the alien constellations. "Protection ideology is too deeply embedded in our civilization." "Ideologies change when survival demands it," Harper replied. "Humans abandon many comfortable beliefs when faced with evidence they were harmful." "Some humans," Syra corrected. "Others cling harder to comforting falsehoods." A bright light streaked across the sky. Not a meteor, but the distinctive energy signature of a Concordat rescue vessel entering the atmosphere months ahead of schedule. "Something's wrong," Syra whispered. "They wouldn't commit resources to accelerate rescue without reason." The ship's communication burst confirmed her fears. Across Concordat space, a crisis had emerged that made the crash survivors' data suddenly, desperately relevant. The protection systems that had coddled galactic civilization for millennia had created the perfect conditions for catastrophe. The Concordat rescue vessel, Inexorable Progress, settled onto the makeshift landing field, its protective shields sizzling as they repelled the planet's atmosphere. The survivors gathered, expecting celebration. Instead, the ship's commander emerged in full biohazard protection, his message grim. "The collapse is spreading across Concordat space," Commander Riven announced. 93 worlds affected. Mortality rates reaching 90% on core worlds. The collapse, a quantum-shifting pathogen that adapted faster than protection technology could respond, had emerged first on Nexus Prime, the most protected world in Concordat space. Within days, it spread through wormhole networks to worlds whose inhabitants had no natural immune response after centuries of perfect protection. Our most advanced worlds are dying, Riven continued, while less protected frontier planets show resistance. The Concordat Security Council requests immediate transfer of all unprotected humans and transitioning survivors for study. Admiral Telix, transformed by his time without protection, stepped forward. Commander, transmit our research data immediately. The Resilience Protocol may be their only hope. In the Concordat capital, the Security Council reviewed the survivors' data alongside a more disturbing discovery. Genetic analysis suggesting the collapse pathogen wasn't natural. Its structure contained markers indicating deliberate engineering, dating back nearly a millennium. A failsafe, the chief geneticist explained to the emergency session, created by a splinter Concordat faction that foresaw the dangers of complete protection dependency. You suggest our ancestors created a weapon against their own protection systems? The Chancellor asked incredulously. Not a weapon, a corrective. Records indicate they believed minimal environmental exposure was essential for species survival. When their philosophy lost political favor, they encoded this failsafe to activate if protection dependency reached critical levels. The Council turned to Dr. Elena Reyes, brought from Earth under emergency protocols. Your assessment. A pathogen targets biological markers associated with protection dependency, she explained. Systems that have been under stress for generations. Humans demonstrate immunity because we maintained environmental exposure your civilization abandoned. Can your resilience protocol save our people? The Chancellor asked. For some, the transition is physiologically traumatic. Many won't survive it, especially those who've been protected longest. After the session, Council Arkanziva, the highest authority in Concordat space, made an unprecedented decision. We formally request human assistance. All unprotected humans willing to serve as transition guides will receive highest diplomatic status. On Earth, the UN Security Council debated the Concordat's request. The discussion grew heated as Minister Chen of China slammed his hand on the table. They attempted to undermine human adaptability, and now they want our help. Let them face the consequences of their protection dogma. President Ochoa of Mexico countered, this isn't about revenge. Billions of lives. Billions who would have happily watched us weaken and die in their protective bubbles, interrupted the Russian representative. The debate raged for 3 days, while collapse cases appeared on Earth among the most heavily protected populations. In his temporary quarters at the UN complex, Jack Harper watched the news reports. The Concordat vessel had returned him to Earth specifically to address the Security Council, but the political machinations delayed his testimony. A soft knock at his door revealed Xyra, her hybrid physiology, now stable enough that she no longer registered on Concordat biometric scanners. Your world is as fractured as mine, she observed. Humans specialize in division before cooperation, Harper replied. It's our most frustrating quality and our greatest strength. We argue every option before choosing a path. We don't have time for arguments. The collapse spreads exponentially. Harper nodded. I'm addressing the council tomorrow. Will you join me? My appearance would cause panic. My physiology represents what protected Concordat citizens fear most, the loss of their protective identity. The next morning, Harper stood before the UN Security Council, his unprotected appearance now a rarity in the chamber of protected diplomats. We face extinction, he began bluntly. Not just the Concordat, all of us. The collapse doesn't recognize political boundaries. He described the ruins on the crash planet, an ancient civilization destroyed by the same protection dependency now threatening the galaxy. The choice is simple, adapt or die. Humans hold the knowledge to navigate this transition because we refused complete protection. We maintained connection to our evolutionary heritage. He activated a hologram showing Emma Anderson's medical records, before protection, during protection dependency, and after transition. This child nearly died from protection technology. The resilience protocol saved her. It can save billions more. Concordat citizens, humans, anyone willing to remember that life evolved to face adversity, not hide from it. 3 days later, the UN voted to implement Operation Controlled Exposure, a coordinated effort to transition protection-dependent populations back to natural resilience. Dr. Rice would oversee the scientific foundation. Harper and other Eden Enclave leaders would train transition guides. In her private chamber, Council Archenziva faced the most difficult decision in Concordat history. The protocol requires dismantling foundational protection systems, her aide explained. Many citizens consider this spiritual desecration. And what percentage will survive transition? She asked. For heavily protected populations, perhaps 60%. Many elders will not survive. The Archean removed her ancestral protection mask, the first time any Archean had done so in public in 7,000 years. Then we will grieve our losses while saving those we can. Authorization granted. As implementation teams deployed across the galaxy, Harper received a disturbing transmission from Xyra. A faction calling themselves protection purists had seized control of multiple Concordat worlds, claiming death preferable to barbaric exposure. Their leader, Commissioner Nivel. The greatest challenge wouldn't be the collapse itself, but the ideology that made it inevitable. On the Vexillian homeworld, Jack Harper led 50 unprotected humans through the Central Atmospheric Processing Facility. The gleaming complex had maintained perfect environmental conditions for 12 generations of Vexillians. Now it would be systematically deactivated, section by section. Begin Phase 1. Harper instructed his team. Gradual introduction of unfiltered atmosphere. 10 parts per million contaminant allowance. For the protected Vexillians observing behind safety barriers, this represented unimaginable pollution. Yet even this minimal exposure was essential to trigger adaptive responses. "They're suffering," whispered Maya Chen, a former protection advocate who'd transitioned during the Eden Enclave period. "This feels cruel." "Exposure without support would be cruel," Harper corrected. "We're providing medical assistance through every stage. Discomfort is unavoidable, but we minimize suffering." Harper's comm unit chimed. Thyra's face appeared, her hybrid features tense. The protection purists have seized control of 3 more transition centers. Commissioner Nivel is gathering forces for an assault on the Concordat Central Environmental Control Station. Across the galaxy, similar scenes unfolded on 1,000 worlds. Operation Controlled Exposure divided populations into transition cohorts based on age, health, and protection dependency levels. The young and adaptable transitioned first, creating a foundation of resilient individuals who could then support others. On the Concordat capital, Dr. Rice supervised the most challenging implementation. The planet's inhabitants hadn't experienced unfiltered air in millennia. Her team converted massive entertainment domes into transition centers, where protection was removed in carefully monitored stages. Each transition cohort shows consistent patterns, she reported during the daily quantum conference connecting implementation leaders. Initial immune hyperreaction, followed by stabilization if properly supported. Casualty rates, asked Admiral Telix, now heading the Concordat Transition Authority. 17% average across all cohorts. Lower for frontier worlds, higher for core worlds. 17%, Telix repeated heavily. Billions of lives. Against near extinction from the collapse, Rise reminded him. And each successful transition improves our protocols. On the luxury world of Perpetua, the implementation team faced the hardest challenge, a population that hadn't experienced physical discomfort in 20 generations. Even minor temperature variations triggered panic responses. "We've had 7 cardiac events from introducing a 2-degree temperature shift," reported Dr. Ito, the team leader. "Their stress responses are completely dysregulated." The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Archon Veril, eldest member of the Perpetuan Council, publicly removed his protection suit and stepped into unfiltered air. If I can endure this, so can you, he announced to his stunned citizens. I choose painful adaptation over comfortable extinction. The elder didn't survive the transition, his ancient body too dependent on protection systems, but his sacrifice became a symbol that transformed resistance into determination. Meanwhile, Commissioner Neville's protection purist movement gained momentum. Believing the collapse preferable to devolution into barbarism, they sabotaged transition centers and spread propaganda claiming the pathogen was a human bioweapon designed to force primitive conditions on civilized species. Their endgame became clear when Neville's forces seized the Concordat Central Environmental Control Station, the nexus controlling atmosphere quality for 200 core worlds. They're preparing a purification pulse, Kadhaira warned the Emergency Response Council, a sterilization wave that would kill anyone partially transitioned. Billions of lives, Telex whispered. Harper and Syra led the counter-strike team, their hybrid adaptability making them uniquely suited to navigate the compromised environmental systems. The assault became a desperate race through increasingly hostile conditions as Neville's forces ramped up atmospheric toxicity to levels that would kill even partially adapted individuals. In the central control hub, they confronted Neville himself, still fully protected, his face visible through his helmet's faceplate twisted with zealous certainty. You would destroy civilization itself, he spat. Return us to animal existence. We're reconnecting with our biological heritage, Harper countered. There's nothing civilized about extinction through comfort. The confrontation ended not through violence but system failure. Neville's protection suit collapsed under his final act disabled the environmental safeguards, exposing the facility to raw atmospheric conditions. Harper and Syra, their bodies adapted through months of controlled exposure, survived the catastrophic decompression. Neville, dependent to the end on perfect protection, did not. 3 months into Operation Controlled Exposure, the first statistical evidence emerged. Death rates from the collapse dropping on worlds embracing the transition protocols. The pattern was undeniable. Adaptation rather than protection provided the only sustainable defense against the engineered pathogen. Zara stood before the reformed Concordat Council, her hybrid physiology now a symbol of the new direction. We now understand the nature of the failsafe our ancestors created. Not a weapon of destruction, but a correction mechanism. Without the forced adaptation it triggered, our civilization would have eventually collapsed under its own fragility. Across the galaxy, protection dependency gradually gave way to an emerging philosophy of controlled adaptation, painful but necessary growth, rather than comfortable stagnation. The path forward remained challenging. Billions wouldn't survive the transition, but those who did would create a foundation for a fundamentally different civilization, one that recognized environmental interaction as essential rather than threatening. The pain threshold had been crossed. On the other side lay not comfort, but survival. 5 years after Operation Controlled Exposure began, a remarkable ceremony took place in the Himalayan foothills. 200 beings from 12 formerly protection-dependent species gathered at dawn, their bodies exposed to Earth's atmosphere with minimal technological assistance. The Resilience Compact, successor to the fractured Concordat, had established the Interspecies Resilience Academy here, where elevation, temperature variations, and microbial diversity created ideal training conditions for environmental adaptation. Jack Harper, now the Academy's lead instructor, addressed the assembled group. Today marks the beginning of your wilderness pilgrimage, a year-long journey through Earth's varied biomes. You will experience environments your ancestors fled eons ago, reconnecting evolutionary memories your species nearly lost. The participants, volunteer diplomats, scientists, and cultural leaders, would return to their homeworlds as adaptation guides, bringing first-hand experience of controlled environmental exposure. Shinar, a young Vexillian whose silver-blue skin now displayed adaptive melanin patterns from previous outdoor exposure, stepped forward nervously. I am told we begin with rain immersion. On cue, monsoon clouds released their burden over the gathering. Droplets struck exposed skin, once considered toxic by most galactic species, now recognized as essential microbial exchange. Some participants trembled or gasped, their neurological systems still processing sensations their ancestors had avoided for thousands of generations. Others lifted their faces upward, experiencing the ancient planetary communion that protection technology had interrupted. At the Academy's Research Center, Dr. Elena Reyes reviewed 5 years of adaptation data with Council Arch. Not entirely, Reyes answered. Protection technology saved countless lives and enabled accomplishments impossible without it. The error wasn't protection itself, but making it absolute, eliminating the controlled stressors that maintain adaptability. In a mountain meadow 3 months into the wilderness pilgrimage, a mixed species group reached a significant milestone: the first swim in an alpine lake. For most participants, immersion in unfiltered water had been unthinkable months earlier. Calais, a Meridian diplomat whose species evolved in desert conditions, trembled at the shoreline. I cannot. The microbial density. Emma Anderson, now a teenager and one of the human guides, took her webbed hand. Focus on your adaptation training. Your body knows what to do if you let it. Together they waded into the shallows. Calais's translucent skin flushed with stress proteins, then gradually stabilized as ancient adaptations activated. By evening, she was floating on her back, gazing at stars her ancestors had traveled, but never truly experienced without barriers. The Academy's most poignant symbol stood in its central courtyard, a museum containing protection suits from a dozen species, alongside artifacts recovered from the crash planet. The extinct predecessor's protective technology was displayed beside Concordat examples, a stark reminder of parallel evolutionary traps. Harper found Syra there one evening, studying the displays. Her hybrid physiology had stabilized into something unique in the galaxy, neither fully Vixilian nor human, but a bridge between evolutionary approaches. The first graduates return to their homeworlds next month, she said. Will they maintain their adaptations when surrounded by protection culture? Some won't, Harper acknowledged, but enough will, and they'll bring others along. The data is too compelling to ignore. The Resilience Protocol had evolved into the foundation of a new approach to galactic civilization, technology balanced with biological adaptation rather than replacing it. The tension between protection and exposure would require continuous recalibration, opposing the natural tendency toward comfortable extremes. 1 year after beginning their journey, the wilderness pilgrimage participants gathered for a graduation ceremony unlike any in galactic history. Representatives from 12 species stood unprotected on a Himalayan plateau, their bodies transformed by controlled exposure to Earth's varied environments. Each participant placed a piece of personal protection technology into a time capsule, not to be destroyed, but preserved as a reminder of balance rather than absolutism. Shinar, the young Vixilian who had trembled at raindrops a year earlier, addressed the gathering. His once pale skin now displayed vibrant adaptation patterns, his respiratory system efficiently processing unfiltered air. We stand here not as primitives returning to the past, nor as technological beings rejecting advancement, he declared. We stand as integrated beings, honoring both our technological achievements and our biological heritage. The ceremony concluded as a storm approached the plateau. In previous eras, such conditions would have triggered emergency evacuation. Instead, the graduates remained, faces lifted toward the gathering clouds. The first lightning bolt illuminated transformed beings experiencing an elemental connection their ancestors had sacrificed for safety. They had rediscovered what humanity had nearly forgotten, that life evolved not despite environmental challenges, but because of them. Terminal protection had been an evolutionary dead end. The path forward required not constant comfort, but sustainable resilience. When the rain came, no one flinched.